Back to the Future, Jurassic Park, E.T., The Sixth Sense. Kathleen Kennedy isn't just a producer. She's one of the most successful producers in Hollywood history. Her name is on half the movies you grew up loving. And yet, if you ask Star Wars fans, she's a war criminal. In 2012, Kathleen Kennedy was handed the keys to Lucasfilm. Under her watch, The Force Awakens shattered records, but The Last Jedi shattered the fanbase. Andor was a critical masterpiece, while Solo bombed so hard it put spin-off films on ice. Now that she stepped down, fans are celebrating like it's the end of Return of the Jedi. Ewoks dancing, fireworks exploding above the skies of Coruscant, and Yup Nub playing in the streets. But was she really that bad? $6 billion in box office revenue says otherwise. That's enough to buy Lucasfilm back and still have $2 billion left over. However, running Star Wars isn't just about how much money you make from it, it's also about protecting the brand and preserving the magic that makes all that money possible. So to find out how she did, let's dive in and grade Kathleen Kennedy's time running Star Wars. First, let's take a look at her creative vision. Her initial plan was to continue the Skywalker saga with episodes 7, 8, and 9, while also expanding the universe through standalone spin-off films. You know, stories about Han Solo, Yoda, Obi-Wan, Boba Fett, etc. To direct these, she wanted filmmakers with strong individual voices who were willing to take creative risks and bring something new to Star Wars, even if that meant pushing up against tradition. Unfortunately, this entire plan would start to unravel almost immediately. When screenwriter Michael Arndt, director J.J. Abrams, and the rest of the creative team Kennedy assembled struggled to crack the script to episode 7, Kennedy asked Disney CEO Bob Iger to push the film's release date to give them more time. However, Iger flat out refused. He needed to show shareholders that the $4 billion purchase of Lucasfilm was yielding immediate returns. So instead of a polished script and a well-planned out trilogy, Kennedy and Abrams scrambled to get the first movie out. Now, to be fair to Kennedy, this isn't really her fault. It's Iger's. And to Kennedy's credit, she did have Abrams write treatments for episodes 8 and 9, which means at some point they actually did plan out the trilogy, contrary to popular belief. It's just that when Rian Johnson began writing episode 8, he elected to throw those old treatments into the trash and follow his own instincts instead, which Kennedy allowed. Remember, Kennedy wanted filmmakers to take risks, but the problem wasn't that The Last Jedi took risks. It's that those risks weren't part of a unified plan, as Johnson ignored whatever that plan was. And to be fair to Johnson, it's possible that those treatments to episode 8 and 9 were complete shit, which is why he ignored them. Regardless, when fan backlash hit after The Last Jedi's release, Kennedy kind of panicked. Instead of continuing with the creative direction Johnson had pursued, Kennedy course-corrected hard with episode 9, bringing back Abrams and effectively forcing him to undo the previous film to try and appease upset fans. And that whiplash, that lack of cohesion, is the clearest example of Kennedy's biggest weakness as a creative steward. She didn't have a vision of her own. Instead, she tried to outsource that vision to bold young directors, only to panic and fire them the moment they took the very risk she hired them to take. For example, take Rogue One. We remember it as a critical and commercial hit, but behind the scenes, it was pretty much a salvage operation. Director Gareth Edwards was effectively sidelined in the fourth quarter, so Tony Gilroy could come in, rewrite the script, and reshoot large portions of the movie to make it work. And Solo was even bloodier. She fired directing duo Lord and Miller, the guy she hired specifically for their irreverent style, when the movie was nearly finished, replacing them with Ron Howard to reshoot 70% of the film. And she even fired Colin Trevorrow from episode 9 before cameras even rolled, because she wanted to undo the decisions made in The Last Jedi. But the failure wasn't just operational, it was fundamental. Kennedy just didn't have her finger on the pulse of what the audience actually wanted. Very few fans were asking for a Han Solo origin story. Yes, Han is one of the most beloved characters in the original trilogy, but a huge part of that is Harrison Ford. Recasting him, then building an entire movie around explaining how he met Chewbacca or got his last name wasn't a burning demand from the fanbase. At the same time, the movie's fans really wanted never happened. While the prequels were controversial, there was near universal agreement on one thing: Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi. If Kennedy had greenlit an Obi-Wan movie, or the Boba Fett film fans have been begging for since 1980, she likely would have had a slam dunk. Instead, she gave us Solo. And when it bombed, crushed between audience apathy and the toxic backlash to The Last Jedi, she drew the wrong conclusion. She didn't realize Solo was the problem, she decided spin-offs were the problem. And just like that, the Boba Fett, Obi-Wan, and Yoda movies were canceled. Not only that, the defining trait of the Kennedy era wasn't the movies she made. It was the movies she announced, hyped, and then quietly canceled. There was Rian Johnson's trilogy, another trilogy from the creators of Game of Thrones, a film Marvel's Kevin Feige pitched, a Kylo Ren solo film developed by Steven Soderbergh, Wonder Woman director Patty Jenkins' Rogue Squadron film, Guillermo del Toro's Godfather-style crime film about the rise and fall of Jabba the Hutt, and plenty more. Kennedy wasn't building a universe, she was just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what would stick, and none of it did. So when it comes to creative vision, Kathleen Kennedy earns a C-. Not having a strong plan for the sequel trilogy isn't entirely her fault, and her instincts on paper were kinda smart. Hire bold directors, expand the universe, and treat Star Wars like a playground instead of a museum. But vision isn't just ideas. Vision is commitment. It's having a plan, protecting it, and building momentum from film to film, instead of hitting the panic button every time the internet gets loud. And when you combine that with the endless carousel of announced projects that never happened, and a creative graveyard of fired directors, you realize she was just drifting, letting the current of public opinion and other filmmakers decide where the franchise went next. Now let's take a look at financial performance. Right out of the gate, The Force Awakens wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural event. It shattered records, dominated the box office, and reestablished Star Wars as the biggest thing on the planet. And from Disney's perspective, that was mission accomplished. The purchase paid off immediately, and Rogue One also did huge business too, especially when you consider it was a standalone spin-off film with no Jedi and no Skywalkers, proving Star Wars could succeed outside the main saga when it was done right. And then came The Last Jedi, which made $600 million less than its predecessor. Now, usually in a trilogy, if the second movie dips, the third one bounces back, since fans want to see how it all ends. After all, Revenge of the Sith made more than Attack of the Clones, and Return of the Jedi made more than The Empire Strikes Back. But this time, that didn't happen. The Force Awakens made $2 billion, The Last Jedi dropped to $1.3 billion, and The Rise of Skywalker barely crawled past $1 billion. And while that's still an obscene amount of money, that's a 50% decay from the first movie to the last, which shows declining audience interest in the franchise. And then you have the real black guy, Solo, which was the first Star Wars movie to actually lose money at the box office. However, Kennedy's job wasn't just ensuring strong box office returns. Her job was to help Disney turn Star Wars into a long-term business asset. And in that sense, she delivered enormous value. During the peak of her run, Disney stock went from around $40 a share to nearly $200, riding a wave of franchise expansion that included Star Wars at the center of the company's growth strategy. And then there's the real monster, merchandise. Star Wars isn't just about ticket sales, it's toys, clothes, games, collectibles, lunchboxes, flamethrowers, theme parks, you name it. Merchandise alone has reportedly generated enough money that Disney has made more than double what they originally paid for the entire company. However, the success of the movies fuels all that, and when interest in the films and characters drops, interest in the merch drops right along with it. As a result, for financial performance, I'm going to grade her a C+. You can't ignore the billion she made, which is why she kept her job for so long, but you also can't ignore the trend line. A successful CEO grows the audience. Kennedy, on the other hand, shrank it. She treated Star Wars like a savings account that she could just keep withdrawing from without ever making a deposit, and eventually, the check started to bounce. She gets a passing grade for the cash she extracted, but she mortgaged the future to get it, and did real damage to the brand. Finally, let's take a look at her streaming strategy. After Solo bombed and the theatrical side of Star Wars started wobbling, Kennedy pivoted hard, as she basically helped Disney launch its entire streaming era with one weapon, Star Wars. The Mandalorian wasn't just a hit show. It proved that Star Wars could work on the small screen, and essentially carried the entire launch of the Disney Plus platform on its back. Not only that, Baby Yoda became the single most valuable piece of IP created in the last decade. But Disney didn't just want a hit show, they wanted a content factory. They needed to feed the beast to acquire more subscribers and keep current subscribers from canceling, so the slate expanded fast. The Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ahsoka, The Acolyte, and suddenly Star Wars wasn't rare anymore. By making Star Wars available 24/7, she took away the one thing that made it special, its scarcity. Star Wars used to be an event, now it's just content. It's background noise while you fold your laundry. And this is where the strategy fell apart. She took iconic characters like Obi-Wan and Boba Fett, who should have been leading massive summer blockbusters, and shoved them into limited series that often looked cheap and felt stretched. But here's the twist. Streaming also produced the best thing Star Wars has made in years, Andor. Andor is what Star Wars looks like when it stops trying to be a theme park ride and starts trying to be actual storytelling again. It's patient, it's political, it's character-driven, it respects your intelligence, it doesn't rely on member berries and nostalgia dopamine, and it proves something important. Star Wars doesn't need to be loud to be good. So when you look at Kennedy's streaming strategy, on the one hand, she successfully transitioned Star Wars into a streaming-first powerhouse. She helped launch Disney Plus, created a monster hit with The Mandalorian, a critical darling with Andor, and kept the brand alive when theatrical momentum was fading. On the other hand, however, she oversupplied the market, diluted the sense of event television, and allowed the quality of the brand to become inconsistent, which is exactly how you turn a legendary franchise into content. And even though the pivot was smart, the execution was a tad bit messy. So for streaming strategy, I'm going to give her a B-. She produced major wins like The Mandalorian and Andor, but diluted the brand by oversaturating the market with inconsistent content. However, when you add it all up, Kathleen Kennedy earns a final grade of a C+ running Lucasfilm. She didn't run it into the ground, but she made Disney a fortune, launched the streaming era, and even delivered real bright spots like Rogue One and Andor. But she also oversaw a sequel trilogy with no real cohesive plan, a theatrical slate defined as much by cancellations as releases, and a franchise that steadily lost its momentum and mystique. So, that's my final grade. Now I want to hear yours. What grade would you give Kathleen Kennedy's time running Star Wars? And who should I cover next on the Hollywood Report Card? Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more Hollywood deep dives.